In 1972, a probe was sent to space in search of aliens. We watch it as it travels through space before we cut to Neil Clarke, walking through a crowd, and towards a podium where Catherine West greets him. She speaks of Neil's book and asks him some questions, before dogs start causing havoc amongst the guests. Neil abruptly wakes up and answers the door as the doorbell goes crazy. His neighbor, Fiona, complains about his dog barking. He tries to play it off by lying about his eyesight, but she doesn't buy it. She vaguely threatens him before leaving. Neil takes his dog Dennis out for a walk, and on the way out, sees Catherine, his neighbor. They chat for a moment before she goes into her apartment. He leaves the building, defeated. Catherine, while at work at Book News, is dismayed to find herself at odds with her boss. After being told to write more aggressive and hostile questions, she realizes that the show's host is only there to tear authors down, and doesn't even read the books. Catherine argues with James, the producer, before he hits on her. Neil, while at the grocery store, sees Catherine crying and unsuccessfully tries to cheer her up. The Space Council picks one Earthling to determine if they're able to discern between good and evil. The chief alien tells them that the chosen human will have the power to do anything they want. If the Earthling uses their power for evil, they'll be eliminated. If they use it for good, they'll be invited to join the council. The system lands on an image of Neil. The chief alien tells them that the human has 10 days to prove the case for humanity. While Neil cycles home, he's sideswiped by a van, and while on the pavement, they give him his powers. Cinema recap here. We've got a little challenge that'll take 5 seconds, and it will change your life forever. You ready? All you gotta do is like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and you'll receive 10 free years of good luck. It's as simple as that. When Neil arrives at school late, Mr. Robinson chews him out. Neil goes off to his rowdy class, but instead remains outside reading his paper. Ray unsuccessfully tries to hit on Miss Pringle in the break room and asks Neil what he'd do if he could do anything he wanted. Not taking it seriously, Neil says he'd make his dog regurgitate his notes on chapter 3 of his book. Back at home, his dog does just that. When Ray follows up by asking him to choose something impossible, Neil says the notes would be regurgitated intact. Back at his home, the thrown-up notes turn into an intact document. Ray asks if he'd make someone worship the ground they walked on, but Neil disagrees, saying it's taking advantage. When Ray presses him one more time, he jokingly says he'd make alien spaceships destroy his class, which immediately happens. Neil runs to his class to discover it's been destroyed. The Council of Aliens asks what just happened, and contact Gat, the alien responsible, who says he was practicing. Gat argues that he knows they're gonna decimate the planet anyways. Back at home, Neil walks in and cleans his dog's poop, when the story of the classroom's destruction on the news interrupts him. Neil argues with Dennis and says that there's no way it was a spaceship because that would mean he has powers. He jokingly says he wouldn't be scooping up dog poo if he could just command it to walk itself to the toilet. However, his joke results in the poo doing just that. It walks across the living room and into the bathroom. Neil, shocked, follows and watches as it flushes itself down the toilet. He runs to the kitchen and grabs the whiskey, needing a drink to make sense of what just happened. Neil then sees his notes on the ground intact. He freaks out even more. He picks them up, and after knocking the whiskey into the sink, he commands it to get back into the bottle before commanding it to replace itself with a new bottle. Neil follows the bottle to the liquor store, which is closed. The bottle launches itself into the store through the door and sets off the alarm. Neil immediately runs, but as he turns the corner, he runs into a police officer. The officer has Neil's face down in the dirt. When Dennis bites the officer, he releases and Neil runs away. They hide for a while in a park bush before being caught by a group of officers. Neil demands that he's back at home eating dinner with Dennis, and immediately is back at his flat eating from a dog bowl next to Dennis. Neil makes the realization that it was him that caused his class to be destroyed. He makes it so everyone who died is alive again. Across London, corpses reanimate, in morgues and at graveyards, freaking everyone out. He quickly realizes his mistake and makes it only his class that comes back to life. Neil realizes he brought them back still with injuries, and fixes that, before finally making it so the explosion never happened. Neil ends up back in the break room with Ray earlier that day before the explosion. Ray asks Neil what he'd do if he could do anything. Neil, thinking he's imagined the whole ordeal, tells Ray he dreamt that he could do anything and caused his entire classroom to die in an explosion. At the studio, Catherine watches in horror as Fenella interviews an author. She makes terrible remarks about his book and his deceased wife. James and Catherine argue about something Fenella's upset about before James hits on Catherine, remarking that she could sleep her way to the top. Then Catherine sees her ex-boyfriend Grant outside and runs out. Annoyed that he's there, Catherine tells him to leave. Grant tries to convince her that he really cares about her, but Catherine says it doesn't matter because she doesn't care about him. Soon, James walks out and puts his arms around Catherine, telling Grant to leave. Grant makes vague threats before eventually leaving. Neil, thinking he dreamt up the whole thing, goes to class and demands his class be model students, only to realize it actually happens. He walks in and they greet him positively, a massive shock to him. Later on, he makes Mr. Robinson pleasant towards him. In the staff room, Neil watches as Ray pines over Miss Pringle. Neil makes Miss Pringle worship Ray, and when she does, he realizes he honestly can do absolutely anything. Standing at home in the mirror, thinking about this power he has, he decides to make his penis bigger, but immediately falls over as it's too big. He realizes he needs to be incredibly specific. He changes it to be a penis women love. He demands for himself a great body, but gets a woman's body. When he requests the body of a great man, he gets Albert Einstein's body. Finally, he gains the body of a well-built man. Lying in bed that night, Neil makes it so he can see Catherine from his room. When he looks over his bed, he sees her ironing her shirt. And when he makes a noise, she looks up and sees Neil. Panicking, Neil makes it so he can't see her and accidentally causes himself to go blind. When things go back to normal, Neil makes Catherine forget about the whole thing. The next day, Neil goes to Ray and tells him that he can do anything he wants. While Ray being unconvinced, Neil makes a skeleton in Ray's classroom tell them who he was when he was alive. The skeleton immediately starts talking, and Ray thinks that Neil's playing a trick on him. After the skeleton starts making racist and anti-Semitic remarks, Neil makes it jump out the window. When it does, the skeleton lands in Mr. Robinson's hands. Even after Neil covers the classroom in flowers, Ray is still unconvinced. In fact, he's only convinced with how Mr. Robinson is being kind to Neil. As Catherine leaves work, Grant pulls up in a fancy sports car and calls her. She keeps telling Grant to leave her alone, but he won't take no for an answer. Grant tells Catherine that he rented them a luxury apartment, which she declines. He hands her the keys anyway and speeds off. That night, Catherine drinks with her friend Rosie, who convinces her to sleep with Neil, even though Rosie thinks Neil might be gay. Back in space, the Council of Aliens has a power failure, and Neil is momentarily without his powers. He wakes up unaware that his powers are temporarily gone, and attempts to make it so that Catherine is madly in love with him. Immediately, Catherine rings his doorbell, and Neil thinks his powers worked fast, but it's simply good timing. Neil opens the door to Catherine, who asks if he's gay. Once he says no, she proceeds to kiss him, and Grant watches from outside as he hangs onto the drain pipe. As Neil and Catherine go into his apartment, the drain pipe breaks. Grant falls and breaks his leg. Neil wakes up as his powers return. He sees a note from Catherine, who's left to prepare for work. He gets out of bed and sees that it's a rainy day in London, and makes the weather like it's in LA, only for it to suddenly become night. Forgetting how specific he needs to be, he makes the weather like it is usually in LA during the day. While Neil is having the time of his life, Dennis is always barking for biscuits. And after they talk for a bit, Dennis gets excited about the ringing doorbell. Neil realizes that it would be bad if people heard a talking dog, so he gets Dennis to be quiet before going to the door and letting Catherine in. While Catherine explains to Neil that she likes him, Dennis makes rude comments from the kitchen. After telling Catherine that Dennis is a plumber, Neil goes and tells him to shut up. Catherine overhears Dennis tell Neil he wants to shag his leg, and assumes Neil is gay. The situation is made even worse when Dennis shouts out that he loves Neil, leading Catherine to announce that Rosie was right. Neil is gay. Neil runs after Catherine but encounters Grant along the way. He makes it so he's on the bus that Catherine's on, but ends up literally on top of the bus. Neil says he wants to be inside the bus, and ends up in the engine. Finally, he's in the passenger section, covered in grease. As he's about to catch up to Catherine in the streets, Ray intercepts and begs Neil to stop Miss Pringle, who's gone too far with desiring Ray. While attempting to get a word in, Neil turns Ray into a duck, but when Duck Ray doesn't stop making noise, Neil turns him into a sausage. Miss Pringle shows up and asks where Ray is. Quickly distracted by Ray's car, she starts worshipping it along with the other members of her cult. Neil walks away with Sausage Ray and goes into the shop Catherine went into. Neil attempts to talk to her, but she's uninterested, and the lady behind the counter begins arguing with Neil, saying he stole the sausage. Neil walks out after Catherine, and the woman working at the butchery hits him over the head with a plate before forcing him to pay. In defeat, Neil nearly eats the sausage, forgetting it's Ray. He turns Ray back, and Miss Pringle spots him, forcing Ray to run. The aliens watch and don't believe Neil is ever going to do anything good. Some of them want to get on with the destruction of Earth, but the kindly alien stops them. Catherine goes home and finds Grant in her apartment. She locks him in and screams at him to leave, causing the entire block to look at her from their various floors. Neil convinces Catherine to sneak into his apartment, promising he won't make any moves on her. He runs into his flat and tells Dennis that Catherine is coming. Neil tells Dennis to act like a normal dog while Catherine's around. While Neil and Catherine are having dinner, he attempts to tell Catherine the truth about his powers, but she doesn't believe him. Grant climbs up and watches them from outside again. Neil makes it so that she has a bigger desk and a great view at work, but she doesn't see these changes. Neil tells Catherine to ask him to make something happen, and he will. Grant breaks through the window and says he's Catherine's fiancé, which further infuriates her. Grant pulls a gun on Neil, and Neil provokes him, making it so that any bullet bounces off of him, before making Grant drop the weapon. Catherine, thinking they're both crazy, throws the gun out before leaving. Neil makes it so that if Grant attempts to strangle him, his arm will break. When it does break, Neil makes it better. This strange series of events confuses Grant. Neil sticks him to the ceiling and wall before he makes it so Grant's head is buried in the pot plant. Grant begs Neil to stop, and Neil tells him to be nice. After all, he can make Grant's life great or miserable. While Neil's explaining his power, Grant hits him over the head with a pot plant. At work, Catherine concedes to her boss James, saying she'll sleep with him. He tells Catherine he got her a new desk, and when she goes to her new office, she sees a big desk and a great view, making her realize Neil was telling the truth. Neil's tied up and forced to read from a piece of paper Grant wrote, or he'll shoot Dennis. Catherine runs out to find Neil but realizes that something terrible happened. She finds Ray in Neil's closet. They go to the apartment that Grant got for him and Catherine. As they run, they're chased by Miss Pringle and her cult, who want to kill Ray to prove he's immortal. They get to the apartment, where Grant makes Neil skip to the final item, making Catherine love Grant. Neil does it, but then turns Grant into a corgi and cancels all Grant's requests. He finally makes Miss Pringle leave Ray alone, but once everyone leaves, so do Catherine and Ray, who are annoyed with Neil. The aliens watch Neil, all alone, and realize he has no concept of good and evil. Neil speaks to Catherine and realizes that the problem isn't what happened at the apartment, but instead Catherine feels like she has no free will and doesn't know what her decisions are and what's being forced on her. Neil tells Catherine he loves her, but she says she can never love Neil because of his powers. Neil realizes that everything that's happened is his fault. He's been using his powers selfishly and goes to end world hunger, reverse global warming, give everyone a chance to live in their dream homes, and makes no country go to war for any reason. He quickly realizes that even trying to do good causes harm, as countries now have obesity problems, wars for no reason, no undeveloped land, and a second ice age is coming. Feeling lost, Neil goes to commit suicide. He jumps into the river, but Dennis jumps in after him. Neil is forced to save him. The aliens come to the decision to destroy Earth, having a vastly different idea of what is good and what is evil. They see Neil's attempts to help people as weakness, and for that, they begin their attempts to destroy Earth. Neil gives his power to Dennis. As the aliens fire their weapon, Dennis makes it so the providers of the powers are destroyed, causing the laser to kill the aliens and destroy their spaceship. Neil wakes up on his stack of papers and realizes his abilities are truly gone. He opens the door on Fiona and kisses her before running to Catherine. He tells her the powers no longer exist. When she says she's impressed, he says maybe they can have dinner sometime, to which Catherine says maybe, before walking into her apartment. Neil, hopeful, is about to go back to his apartment when Catherine opens the door and suggests they do it tonight, causing Neil to run upstairs to get ready. Absolutely Anything was released in 2015 by Lion.